Hello, it's me, and today I want to talk about inspiration in music, in songwriting. I think that music is the kind of art which is much more difficult to break down in this cold, analytical manner as I did with writing, with storytelling. And I think that it is because music for all people is a foreign language, while storytelling is a mother tongue. I think that most people communicate with words, so it is easier for us to understand the kind of art that uses words as the language that consists of words. And it is much more easier to discuss this kind of art in its own language. Music, however, is not a conventional way of everyday communication, and it makes it, on the other hand, much more difficult to understand and discuss with words if we're talking about musical experience as a whole and not just music theory. And on the other hand, this foreignness of the language of music, of this kind of art, is what makes it, I think, so mysterious and beautiful and powerful and sometimes heartbreaking. Unlike with literature, unlike with storytelling, when the communication between the author and the audience is happening through words, through verbally articulated sentences, through story, in music, this connection is established through the communication of pure emotions through sound. And if we see music this way, as the language of pure emotions, as a communication of pure emotions, does it mean that musical inspiration can't exist without these emotions? That if we don't have any personal feelings that inspire us, then we can't create music? I can't speak for everyone, of course. I'm just a singer-songwriter who had written 10 songs, or a little bit more than 10 songs that I like. However, I can speak for myself, and my answer would be yes. Yes, it really relies on your feelings, it really relies on your emotions, and just like emotions are very difficult to predict and control, inspiration in music is also barely predictable and controllable. However, there are several nuances to that which I would like to discuss, and for the sake of this video I've broken down my own songwriting process and I tried to find the answer to how exactly it works and in which parts of this process the emotional inspiration is the most needed, and whether or not we can do anything when we don't have any strong feelings at the moment. So I hope that this video, even though it breaks down my own songwriting process, but I hope that it will be also relevant to you and maybe even helpful. I personally see the songwriting process as a process of turning something sad into something beautiful. I think that the things that inspire me are pretty universal. Those are people, feelings, relationships. And I think that all of those situations in real life, for me, they contain both tragedy and beauty. And in real life, I would say tragedy of those situations is more emphasized, is more prominent, and beauty is more subtle. However, when you try to make music out of it, you emphasize the beauty and tragedy goes to the second place. So hopefully it becomes a beautiful, sad song. And I think that it is something that maybe helps you purify certain situations, certain tragedies, when you see what was beautiful about those people, about those feelings, what was sad about those missed opportunities. And I think that this is why we as listeners sometimes actually like sad songs, and we usually need the exact kind of sadness that we experience, because we always need to find some ways to emphasize beauty in our lives, and beautiful music is something that contributes to this ability of seeing beauty. And of course not all people write sad music, but I think that what lies in the heart of inspiration, of any musical inspiration, is, I would say, love, because all good songs are actually about love. Even Some are literally about romantic love, but there are other kinds of love. When you write songs about death, you write about the loss of someone you loved. When you write about hatred, it is also a song about the loss of love or of potential love, or about somebody hurting someone you love. If you even write songs about love for your country or love for God, it still has this personal feelings of love. And we, I think, as human, usually experience love for other persons, for other people, because this, I think, is what makes it more alive. So how does all of this apply to the practical process and to the practical side of writing songs? Well, I would say that I believe that musical inspiration, just like inspiration in writing, has the same three sides: knowing what to do, feeling how to do it, and having a desire to do it at the moment. However, in musical inspiration, the line between these three sides is much more blurred. I am sure that most composers wouldn't even agree on what we define as what in music writing process and what we define as how in music writing process, and what exactly should drive you to write music. So I will only talk about my own view of it, and I personally see it like this. The subject of what in music, for me personally, is about the melody, the chord progression, the sequence of sounds that makes the song recognizable from the point of view of music. Because first of all, it is because I first usually start with writing melody, and second, it is because I believe that music plays the leading role in songwriting and not lyrics. The question of how, for me, concerns everything that lies between this draft of a melody and the finished song. It is the way you put the song together. So it is about lyrics, it's about rhythm, it's about the structure of this music. So everything that makes this song a real song relates to the question of how. The third side of what makes you write music, usually it's either a very strong feeling or an idea, and for me it is a strong feeling. So how exactly does it work in terms of inspiration? I would say that even though I see the process of writing melody as a very emotional process, however, I think that it might be that this part of writing music doesn't always and doesn't necessarily require a strong personal emotion. The thing is with writing melody is that when you dive into this language of pure emotions, which is the way I view music, then you have to deal with these emotions. You experiment, you explore the possibilities of music, you try to write the melody, you try to find sounds and harmonies that make you feel something. You can even approach it in a pretty cold manner, but sometimes this music, this language, can be enough for you to start feeling certain emotions when you work with that. So sometimes, not always, but sometimes it doesn't require, I would say, this external, personal, emotional inspiration. And also what helps me with this melody writing process is occasional self-education, because I don't have a complete musical education, and there are many things that are very obvious to classical musicians who have this complete education that are new to me. And sometimes it is an obstacle, but sometimes it can be a source of inspiration. For example, this is how I wrote my song Blue. At that moment of my life, I was very much overwhelmed by very strong feelings, and I was so overwhelmed by them that I couldn't even write literature anymore, that I couldn't write my story. I felt like I needed a more powerful language. I had a melody that I had written some time before that was very tragic, and I didn't do anything about it back at the time, and I started with writing the lyrics that fit that melody, and this is how I started to write music again after the pretty big break. However, after I had finished that song, I still had some feelings left over, but they weren't enough to write another song out of it, but they were enough to start writing another melody. And since I haven't been composing melodies for quite a while at that moment, I realized that I needed to learn something about it. So I looked for lessons on YouTube, I think, about writing music, and it was one of the first lessons that I've seen, and it said that one of the simple ways to compose a melody is when you write a melody and then you play it backwards. And I was surprised that it is a legitimate way to write music, so I tried doing that. And since I had this very strong feeling and I knew approximately what to do and what to start with, that is how I wrote the melody for Blue. And a few months after, when I was inspired by another feeling, by another emotion, it made me write the lyrics, and I think that those lyrics, they fit this melody very accurately. I didn't even have to change this melody too much, and this is how I wrote Blue. I asked you when it was almost night time to leave, whether you thought that again we would ever meet. Silently, deeply you looked in my eyes. All that morning your eyes were incredibly blue. And then you talked with your so gentle voice, and not hiding my choice started falling for you. But if you'd asked me to stay, I'd agree. Your light blue eyes make me weak in my knees. I've never thought it would make it all easier, but now I'm falling for you, as you see. However, when you get to this part of music creating process of how, when you have to make a real song out of the draft of a melody, I think that this is the part of songwriting process that requires emotional inspiration, personal emotional inspiration. This is how it sometimes happens. You write a melody, you have some emotion when you write it, or you may not have it before you write it, but there might be born some emotion while you write this melody. But you don't have any personal story behind it, so you don't know what it's all about. And for me, when I have a certain story about it, when I feel inspired by this story, this is when I turn this draft into a song. Usually it happens like that. When I have this inspiration, usually I start playing the melody that I was working with before, or very rarely I would make it up as I go, and I usually start singing the lyrics that feel right at the moment. So, of course, it doesn't sound like very good poetry at the beginning. However, I would play this melody in the rhythm that seems right, with the lyrics that come to my mind that seem right, and I play it before it starts sounding like good lyrics, as something that gives justice to the situation. Lyrics is a very important part of turning a draft into a song. It is a very important part of making it a real song. That is because lyrics are what makes this. Because lyrics, they take this more abstract emotion that you feel when you may compose a melody, but lyrics make this emotion more clear and specific. For most people, things that inspire us to write songs are universal, but they're also eternal and they don't get old. And I think that the reason why they don't get old is because all people have their own personal story about those things, and they all have unique experiences with that. The thing with lyrics, I think, is that they have to be specific. They have to reflect how exactly the story is your story. You don't have to try to be original or unique, but you have to notice what are the paradoxes of this story, what are the specifics of this story that makes it your own. And you have to reflect it in lyrics. So what can we do if we don't feel any specific feelings that would inspire us, but we still want to write music? I don't think that I have the right answer to it, probably. However, I think that it is important to understand what you can control about this process and what you can't. Things that we can do, I think, is something that has to do with this exploration of musical language. That is the only part of songwriting process that I personally can approach without any personal feelings sometimes. And I would say that I can compare it to exploring a foreign language before you have something to say. Music is this kind of art that speaks emotions. So even when you surround yourself by somebody else's music, it makes you perceive your everyday life differently. When you turn on this certain music, it can give you a completely new perspective on the context in which this music is played. So when you explore the music and when you find the sounds that make you feel something, that you find beautiful, this is, I think, something that can make you more susceptible to the beauty around you, to the feeling that you have. This is what you can do. I don't think that you can force this emotional inspiration. However, I don't think that we should despair just because most of us right now are locked at our houses, and maybe most of us or many of us have nothing really going on in social way, and there aren't any relationships, there aren't any feelings that we could write about. I think that we exist not only at the present moment but also in our memory. So you never know what will trigger some feeling that would be strong enough to feel it as if it is happening to you right now, and something that would be strong enough for you to write a song. However, I feel like the lack of inspiration, especially in music, isn't always a bad thing. We can argue about the nature of inspiration and creativity, but I see inspiration still and creative process as some kind of a miracle. And I think that inspiration is very sensitive to any attempts to turn this miraculous process into a cold, soulless production. And I think that maybe that is why every time we develop our skills and get more experience in this creative process, every time we get a little bit closer to feeling that we have it all figured out, then we lose all of our inspiration. I think that this is some kind of a defense mechanism so that we wouldn't create art that is soulless and empty. Art, creative process, I think it requires some struggle, and by that I mean not strong negative feelings. I mean it requires some fight in this creative process. It requires some courage, and it requires you to feel lost at some moment and to experiment and to do something that is unexpected to you, to not know how exactly it is going to turn out in the end. It is a part of creative process, and whether this creative process lasts for 5 minutes or for several years, you have to live through it honestly, I think. We all have to. I sometimes forget about it, and sometimes I might have some disrespect to this miracle of creativity, and when I feel like I can live by my own rules and make my inspiration, my creative process, follow my own rules. But the thing is that you can't. You are a free artist, but you rely on inspiration. And unless you create your own obstacles by not doing anything, by not knowing anything, by falling into despair, unless you create your own obstacles, you shouldn't feel bad about not being inspired all the time. I think that this struggle in art is what creates a unique relationship between you and this piece of art that you're creating. And I guess it can be controlled to raising children, even though, of course, your songs aren't exactly living creatures, but even if you have 50 children, you still have to have a personal relationship with each one of them. or else you're a bad parent. You can't treat your children like clones. And you shouldn't also treat your songs like clones. Art, I think, is like that. It is hard at times, and it is hard at times for everyone. And I think that we have to appreciate it, because this is what it is, and this is what we love, and we have to be respectful to this miracle. So that is what I think about it. Of course, I'm not saying that I have all the answers. Those are just the answers that I found working on this video and asking myself this question. So I would like to hear about your own songwriting process, or just whether or not you ever wrote songs, because I know that not all of my viewers are songwriters. Some are fiction writers or people who do other things. So I would like to hear from you, and thank you for watching, and goodbye.